The battle that's going to be taking place at the end of time is one that's a line in the sand. Which side are you going to choose?
The Vatican Library itself has been digitizing their 80 million codices. Some of the manuscripts detailing some of the UFO, UAP type stuff from maybe centuries ago. There was like these ships that were sailing through the air and let down an anchor.
And there's like some villagers that came over and tried to grab hold of the man, and he like drops to the ground dead. As it is established that he was called a god by the pious Prince Constantine, since it is manifest that even God cannot be judged by men. They came and they slaughtered thousands of them. I just to the man, just killed them. They had to pay city workers a week later to drag the bodies out, and they dragged 1,100 bodies out of the sunroom. So they're calling Rome the most bloody, perfidious, murdering, massacring, and assassinating government upon earth, all the way across the United States. And the headline that they ran was, "Old wound healed." Old wound healed, over and over and over. And he is the one that is orchestrating all this behind the scenes, and he has power to appear like a being of light, like a glowing ball in the sky, like a ship, an ancient ship with an anchor that's cast down to the earth.
James, Alex, thanks for coming. This has been a wild ride. You're just down the road here, and it's really neat to actually have some other YouTubers that are actually doing this and have their own channel here. So what channel is it? And tell us the name of it, and tell us how you got started.
Well, so our channel is Heritage and Hope Ministries. We're heritageandhope.org. We started a YouTube channel. It's really been a wild ride. I was telling James yesterday, it's like we're in a fighter jet and we're like pulling back on the stick, and it's a 9G pull, and we're like, the afterburners are lit because it's just been a wild ride. We uploaded our first channel in our new studio January 12th. And so we've been doing this for, 6 months now? And we're growing very rapidly. James has been doing some research into old documents longer. He has his own channel, Biblical Hope.
Okay.
One word, just Biblical Hope. And so he's been kind of looking into ancient Latin texts and kind of deciphering what those are and finding little nuggets throughout history. And, we've been watching your channel, and we've really enjoyed seeing how there's a link there that explains, like, our worldview can explain so much. And so, like, if there's things that are unexplained and they don't fit in your worldview, what are you going to do with that information? And so I've really appreciated watching Strange Normal, because there are some things that are happening in society today that a lot of people don't have an answer for.
Yeah. One of the things that I saw on some of your videos was what the Vatican might be hiding or something like that. And it actually challenged me to say, I wonder if any of that might be public. Is there anything that if you really dug at it, you could find? And it was interesting, the Vatican Library itself has been digitizing their 80 million codices since 2010. And some of the manuscripts detailing some of the potential UFO, UAP type stuff from maybe centuries ago. Is it legend? Is it, was there something that actually took place? Possibly. It's interesting to read. And I actually found a story of something over in the UK where there was like these ships that were sailing through the air and let down an anchor, and there was a bunch of fog, but an anchor came down, and somebody got like kind of taken up, if you will. And so it's interesting. Some of the
This is from hundreds of years ago, right?
Yeah. So now, granted, in their day, it's kind of operating with or maybe presenting itself the way the greatest technology they had at the time, which would have been like ships,
sailing ship,
old-fashioned sailing ship, but going through the clouds. But today we've seen like more high-tech manifestations kind of being talked about and whatnot in the news with the military and all that. But there's a lot more in the Vatican archives and the history that a lot of people aren't aware of. And so that's kind of what our ministry likes to, what we like to do is to go dig through those records and say, well, what else is there that might give a bigger explanation.
Yeah.
And so we started actually collecting our first old document that we bought. We've not been doing it terribly long, but like I said, it's been a wild ride, very rapid. We bought one in August of last year. And, we were looking online and we were like, man, should we buy it? Should we not? And we like kind of went back and forth on it for a while. And finally I was like, you know what? There's too much old hidden secrets in these books that nobody is talking about that needs to see the light of day. And so that's why, because the thing is how do you explain what's happening in today's society in a more modern aspect? You have to look at it from a historical lens. That's how you should view everything. And so we actually got our first, grab that first book right there. We actually got this first book, which is a book of Catholic canon law.
Oh,
It was written by a Catholic monk by the name of Grecian, and this particular book right here is from 1559. So it's about 460 something years old.
wow.
And so the thing is we got this book because of some of the statements that it makes, because, like James said, the Vatican Digital Library, they are, having so much information come out. And so it's like, okay, they're having these reports, like he said, of this ship floating through the mist, right? And having this anchor chain come down, and then the anchor gets stuck, and they have to have, like, there's this like figure of like a sailor that comes and descends from the clouds and is like trying to work on the anchor. And there was like some villagers that came over and tried to grab hold of the man, and he like drops to the ground dead. And so there's like these spiritual manifestations that are happening. We have a slide on this. That are being documented hundreds of years ago. So yeah, we have this book by Grecian, written in 1559, and it's interesting to discuss some of the things that are actually said in there. What was the Vatican's position on a lot of different things? Well, one of the things that is said about this book here on page 53 is in Distinctio 19. It says, and once you translate it to English, that these decretal epistles, among the canonical scriptures, decretal epistles are counted. So in their mind, where is that placing scripture then? That's placing it on the same plane as this book that was written by man hundreds of years after the formation of the Bible, right?
Wait, what it went over my head. What is decorative epistles?
So this is basically a book of Catholic canon law. Okay. So Grecian was basically he was a monk, but he was also a lawyer. And so he basically wrote down all the different decrees by a lot of different popes spanning centuries. Okay. He compiles them into this, and this is like the authoritative source of information for anybody who's Catholic, essentially. So you would take a copy of this book and ship it to every abbey and, church and cathedral from hither and yon, and they could reference it and say, okay, well, this is the church's stance on this. This is what we should do.
Gotcha.
Because this is the history behind it, basically. And so it's basically elevating this to the same plane as Scripture.
Oh, wow.
So I think that, as a Protestant, I would have a problem with that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if you go on to page 131, Distinctio 40, it has an interesting statement here. It says, if the Pope is found to be negligent concerning the salvation of his brethren, useless and remiss in his works, and furthermore silent about what is good, which harms him more and nonetheless leads countless peoples in large groups to follow him into the first bondage of hell, destined to be beaten with many stripes forever, no mortal presumes to rebuke him for such faults, for he himself is to judge all and is to be judged by no one.
Oh.
So, this is, again, kind of, this book is basically directly from the Protestant Reformation. And so that's also where you're getting these accounts of this, these mystics, the mysticism that is kind of in the church that you see at the same time. So it's like, okay, is there a link there?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what do you think? Have you've looked into the Vatican quite a bit. Do you see kind of a link there between some of the mysticism and that aspect of things? And
well, there were accounts of some of the mystics within Catholicism of levitating and other kinds of stuff. So we can see, aspects of that. There's even accounts going farther back, and I think it's the Apocryphal Acts of Peter, where Simon Magus himself was said to have died in the middle of a levitation act. after Peter knelt down and prayed, and Simon Magus falls unto his death. So it's very interesting. If you go back, there were some other individuals. I think Ignatius of Loyola was known for that. Some of the Jesuits were as well. But it's very different from the kind of principle that we see for Philip, for example, when he teleported or was transported by the Spirit somewhere else. Was very much a need in some cases for the apostles to go different places to preach the word of God. But we see this as more of like a I don't know if you will, maybe more of an experience where it's almost described as like the ecstasy of the experience itself, not so much serving an effort to like send somebody to preach the gospel somewhere, but more of to put on a show, if you will. So it's appealing to the senses instead of the intellect.
Yeah.
So the thing that you kind of have to establish is why was the Protestant Reformation going forward? So you talk a lot about UAPs and how there's a link there to when people cry out in Jesus' name. There's a link there to demonic entities, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're going off the assumption that UAP phenomenon is demonic, then which side here is the right or wrong in Christianity? Because that's the question then, right? Is it the side that's having these spiritual manifestations, or is it not? And that's a question that I think kind of becomes more clear once you go through this and realize how their stance was, and are they acting on Christian principles? Like, and when I mean Christian principles, Christ-like principles. So going forward, there's another text here on page 314 in that book. It is quite clearly shown that the pontiff cannot be entirely bound or loosed by secular power, as it is established that he was called a god by the pious Prince Constantine, whom we mentioned earlier, since it is manifest that even God cannot be judged by men. Wow. And so what are they calling the Pope right there?
Yeah. It's interesting that they're using the word ostenditor in the Latin, which is the same word you find in the Latin Vulgate in 2 Thessalonians 2 for the man of sin when he shows himself to be God, ostendens. And so in this case, this was actually a part of canon law itself, that the Pope was shown or could justly be shown to be called God, as they say, by the pious Prince Constantine, actually affirming the ruler himself in such an act of blasphemy. So
we also have here a section of text by Pope Gregory XIII, and it says, the enemies of the ecclesiastical religion must also be coerced by wars.
Coerced by wars.
Coerced, right. So, do you find force anywhere in the Bible?
No. God, I mean, well, of course there is in the Bible, but not part of God's establishment.
Right.
And it's more consistent with the religion of Cain than of Abel.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I don't know, what do you think? Do you think that the UAP phenomenon, do you think a lot of it is by free will, or do you think it's by coercion or by force, or what? A lot of the experiences that people have.
There is something to the rules of engagement that we see. There's some rules that you have to go to it, or you have to open yourself up to it in order for something to attach almost to you, as the hitchhiker effect is called. But it does seem to select sometimes people that are having very traumatic things in their lives and things like that. So there is a coercion that seems to attach to people at time and to force them into a certain way of thinking.
So, in addition to this statement, what's interesting is Pope Gregory XIII, the same Pope who said the enemies of the ecclesiastical religion must be coerced by wars, he minted this coin. And this coin right here, which we actually have a copy of this coin, that it shows an angel standing over the bodies of dead Huguenots. And this was basically a reference to St. Bartholomew's Day massacre that occurred in 1572. And this is when the Huguenots came into Paris, France, and were there and there was tens of thousands of them there. And in one day in 1572, they came and they slaughtered thousands of them. Just to the man, just killed them like dogs in the street. And they took so many of the bodies and they dumped them into the Seine River, that they had to pay city workers a week later to drag the bodies out. And they dragged 1,100 bodies out of the Seine River alone. And so it's this absolute bloodbath. Now, what's important about this coin that goes along with this statement that's written in this book is he has an angel of death standing over the dead bodies, and then he has his face on the other side. And the angel of death is holding up a crucifix.
Oh.
And so he's basically, he's celebrating it, essentially, right? He's saying like, yeah, we did a good thing. And so here's actually the exact picture of our coin that we have. Ours actually has a little bit of a casting defect in it, because it was from the 1600s. They kept restriking it actually every couple hundred years. And so we actually have a restrike that's about 100 years after the event. So ours is from the 1600s. But it's not like they minted the coin once and then we're like, wow, we made a mistake. We shouldn't do that again. I mean, they kept doing it for hundreds of years. So it's a system of coercion as well. And then in addition to that, we kind of have a interesting pivot here. We have a couple pages here from the original 1583 Geneva Bible. And so these pages right here from the Geneva Bible are original, and this is a pulpit folio Bible. And so this would have been used up front, and this is the same Bible that came over on the Mayflower. And it could have even been this copy. We don't know for sure. There was probably only a few hundred of these Bibles at the time, so it's not a zero chance, but we don't know for sure. But this section of text that we have is actually from Revelation. And we're lucky to have it because most of the time in those old Bibles, when they start getting torn away to where it's just the pages left, the last and the first books of the Bible are the first to go. But so we're lucky to have this one. But it has a section of text from Revelation 13:18, talking about, here is wisdom, let him that hath wit count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. And this number is 666. And then what's interesting is the footnotes. I don't know if you can see the footnotes at the bottom, or it's actually at the top right-hand corner that you'll see the footnotes for that one. It says, if you look at the top right, it says, such as may be understood by man's reason, for about 666 years after this revelation, the Pope, or Antichrist, began to be manifest in the world. So you have a interesting understanding here of all of those that came to the New World. So this is the Bible, that's the Geneva Bible. So this is a Protestant Bible.
Yeah.
This is what would have come over on the Mayflower. This is what was in the New World. So what is their understanding of who the power is here that's spoken of, this beast power?
The Pope.
The Pope.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's a very well-known statement that they believed the Antichrist was the Pope. Pure and simple, right? So if you follow that and understand what Protestant thought was at the time, there's another section of text in this book right here, back in canon law. If you go to page 316, there's a section of text by it's the donation of Constantine. And in this text, there's a very peculiar little statement, Vicarius Filii Dei. And that's a papal title right there, that was used to refer to the Pope. Now, the donation of Constantine was actually a forged document. Okay. And this is well known to be forged now. Like if you look it up, everybody agrees that it was a forged document. And it was supposedly from Constantine back in the 3rd century, who was the Roman emperor at the time, right? And he gives power in this donation of Constantine to the papal system. Okay. Now, that later was proved to be a forgery. Who forged it, we don't know. But it didn't stop it from making its way into canon law and for them using it for hundreds of years, saying, oh, yeah, we got the power from Constantine himself. So it was very convenient for them. And there's a lot of argument out there about who forged it, but it would not be surprising at all to say that the papacy forged it, to basically give themselves power, if that makes sense. But what do they call the Pope in this donation of Constantine.
Yeah.
Vicarius Filii Dei.
Well, it's not just that they call him that, but they constitute him that, which is to give the authority of law behind, like the weight of law behind this actual name. So Andreas Helvig was the one in the early 17th century who figured out that this was the name that adds up to 666. So it's something that Protestants have known for hundreds of years, and that was established upon the foundation of canon law.
Right.
Wow.
So, you can see how that title adds up. Vicarius 112, Filii 53, Dei 501. And what does Vicarius Filii Dei mean? Vicar of the Son of God. Vicar meaning in place of. So in place of the Son of God. Well, can anybody be put in place of God?
No.
No, right? So the next book that we have here, again, and this is all shaping a narrative, right? This is all like painting a picture, basically explaining the Protestant Reformation, because you have to understand the Protestant Reformation before you can really understand and pick out, okay, well, which side of Christianity is correct? Is it the Catholic Church who says that they've been there all the way from the beginning? Or do you choose one of the Protestant denominations, of which there's 30,000 of them? I mean, there's like, the Baptist, and then there's the Reformed Baptist, and then the Southern Baptist, and it goes on and on and on and on. You have all these different little factions of Protestantism. So do you pick a Protestant side, or do you pick a Catholic side? Do you pick so we're talking about your channel focuses on UAPs, demonic activity, right?
Last day spiritualism.
Yeah. Last day spiritualism, right? So do you pick the Catholics who say that they can perform exorcisms? They have priests that are specifically, that's their whole focus, is going and performing exorcisms. Do you go with them, or do you go with the Protestant side? And so in order to make that decision and understand which one is true, you have to understand the Protestant Reformation. And that's what all of this helps lay out. And so you kind of have to go through this and see where it all leads, and then say, okay, now I know which side is the correct one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because at the end of time, we're going to see a big influx of the Catholic Church come in. We're already seeing that.
Right.
And they're already saying that they can interpret what's going on, this whole spiritualism that's happening,
right,
with these fireballs in the sky. And so if you want to go and to take their word for it, and they're going to tell you that it's Mother Mary, it's Our Lady who's been with us the whole time,
right,
then you're going to be deceived.
Right. Like the miracle of Fatima that occurred. Yeah, I'm sure you've probably gone into that.
Oh, there's 20 of them. In the last 100 years, there's been, I think, 18.
Yeah.
And so, and 1500s, I think, was one of the first ones. So, but it's very interesting, all this stuff that happened. Always, 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 the Catholic Church says, oh, it's Our Lady, whatever town it's in.
Yeah.
But the entity itself never identifies itself as Mary. It's the Catholic Church that puts that on her.
Right. Right. So we have another book here that was a Pontificale Romanum. And so it's a pretty little book, actually. It has gilt edges around it. That's real gold. This book is actually from 1682? Yeah. So these are really old books that we have here. I mean, and these are original. These aren't like facsimiles or anything. These are the original books right here. And it has a quote on page 62 that says, "I swear that heretics and schismatics and rebels to our Lord, the Lord Pope, or his successors, I will to the extent of my power persecute and beat down."
Okay.
So I'm sure you've heard of the Jesuit oath before.
Oh, yeah.
The Jesuit oath is hotly contested, right? They will deny it till the cows come home that that's ever a real oath. They'll say, oh, no, that's made up by a bunch of people, bunch of Protestants that just hate Catholics and just hate Jesuits and that type of thing. And it's a very graphic, bloody, disgusting oath. And so anybody would want to deny that it's legitimate, right? But the problem is that you have other oaths like this, the abbot's oath, that affirm those same principles. They want to persecute, beat down, right? It's showing that there's war. We have a bunch of different books here that are all part of kind of a series that we were able to get. And there's 19 of them. And we didn't even bring all the volumes with us here today, but this is the Sacrosancta Concilium, and it's actually talking about forbidding people from having the Bible. So we prohibit also that the laity should be permitted to have the books of the Old or New Testament unless anyone from motive of devotion should wish to have the Psalter or the breviary for divine offices or the hours of the Blessed Virgin. But we most strictly forbid their having any translation of these books.
The Dark Ages. Yeah.
Yep. And in addition to that, you actually go further forward, and there's another quote that says, Paterines and other heretics, whereby whatever name they are considered, we decide what they affect, that they may be burned alive in the sight of men by the fiery judgment.
Wow.
So you think about, I mean, that's a statement, right?
There's a lot of people today that, deny these kinds of statements and downplay the Inquisition and say, oh, it wasn't this big thing. But, when you look at the evidence of what Rome did, like, it can be depressing, but at the same time, like, there's so many people that don't believe and don't even know, like, the history of this and think, oh, all that was like, rumor.
Yeah.
But when you look at the books that they actually put forward, I mean, this is the Sacrosancta Concilia, one of them right here. We've got 18 of them, all 18 volumes. But they're written by 2 Jesuits, and they have history of a lot of the councils and canons and decrees. Not all of them, but there's a lot of them in there and that detail that. I think you have another slide here, Ad Extirpanda.
Mm-hmm.
This one talks about the implementation of torture in actually kicking off the Inquisition. So long as you didn't break arms or legs, you could force an individual. So you can see where a lot of the instruments and devices that actually got created.
The Catholic churches, they have the largest collection of torture instruments out there.
Yeah. Going on, we've got some, it wasn't just torture. They actually prohibited buying and selling. So neither let any commerce be held with them, and selling and buying, that the comfort of humanity having been lost, that they may be compelled to return from the error of their ways. So at the end of time, who's going to prohibit buying and selling? It's this same power. So it's just interesting to see them getting involved with some of this stuff today, because their history is quite dark.
They actually were not just forbidding buying and selling, but forbid under an anathema that any should presume to keep them in their houses or on their lands, sustain them, or transact any business with them.
Yeah, this would have been groups like the Waldenses right here, some of the surrounding individuals who are viewed as heretics. But, looking at the presumption of this power, there were some statements made in some of the councils like, thou art finally another God on earth, and some of the Protestants today, I look at like Doug Wilson, some of the other Christian nationalists who think, well, the popes were never elevated themselves to the point of, Caligula or some of the Roman emperors, but they most certainly did use these kinds of statements in some of the councils to refer to the Pope.
What is Caligula?
Caligula, a Roman emperor who deemed himself, some of the Roman emperors who considered
it was a name.
God.
I was thinking it was a title.
Okay. Yeah, Emperor Caligula.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of them where they called themselves King of Kings.
like the lion, the king of quadrupeds. Thou art another lion, not another king of men only, but made the king of kings and monarch the whole earth. Wouldst bring back, allure, and recall to thy fold other sheep which are not of this fold. Gird thyself, therefore, with thy sword upon thy thigh, O most mighty, for thou also hast 2 swords, the spiritual and the temporal.
There's that union of church and state that, if you think about it, like Christian nationalism. Like,
so, what's interesting is if you look at the Vatican flag itself, actually, you have 2 different colors represented, and you have 2 keys bound together by a round red cord. And that's, again, talking about the spiritual and the temporal, right? The state power and the spiritual power. So it's a combination of church-state power that's kind of coming together, if that makes sense. So that's what this quote was talking about. But going forward, there's another quote But weep not, daughter of Zion, for behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, comes. Behold, God has raised up for thee a Savior who shall save you from the hands of the spoilers. We have expected thee, O most blessed Leo, as the Savior that was to come.
Now,
Leo as the constellation, or what does that mean?
Leo, Pope Leo.
Pope Leo. Pope Leo.
Now,
Oh, okay.
So this was, reckoning back to Leo X. But if you look forward, we got Leo actually just recently who got installed as Pope again.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, before you get to that next slide there, as just building on this idea, this is Lucius Ferreris right here, his work, Prompta Bibliotheca Canonica.
Let the camera behind you see it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is from 1766 right here. And this particular book has some more of those kinds of statements. If we go to Papa Art 2 right here, where the Pope is not merely man, but he's like God or quasi-deus, and the vicar of God, vicarius Dei. The Pope can actually be called most holy, so Papa Sanctissimus appellatur. But they say further that in terms of authority, he's like God on earth, and that he has so much authority and power that he can modify, declare, and interpret divine law.
Wow.
So, one of the things that Protestants realized in terms of what the Pope actually did in changing divine times and laws was actually altering the fourth commandment and changing it from Sabbath to Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, at the Council of Trent, January 18, 1562, Rome responded to the sola scriptura Protestants by pointing out their logical inconsistency in keeping Sunday. Now, not all of them kept Sunday. There were some who actually kept the Sabbath. But we can see right here that they said that the Sabbath, the most glorious day, has been changed not by virtue of the teaching of Christ, but upon the authority, supposedly, of the church. And contains that sermon from the Council of Trent by Gaspar da Faso. He was archbishop. And his solution to Protestants at the Council of Trent was to point out their logical inconsistencies. If they kept Sunday, then logically they accepted the authority of the church, and at least on matters of divine law. And so how could they dare rebel unless they were nothing more than rebels? In other words, they didn't have a legitimate foundation if they kept Sunday. If they kept Sunday, then they were not truly sola scriptura. And this was how Rome tried to undermine Protestants at the Council of Trent. It's a fascinating argument, but it was an argument that trickled down into many other books. The Faith of Millions by Jack O'Brien has some discussion about that, where that Saturday, not Sunday, is specified in the Bible. Isn't it curious that non-Catholics who profess to take their religion directly from the Bible and not from the church observe Sunday instead of Saturday? Yes, of course it is inconsistent. But this change was made about 15 centuries before Protestantism was born, and by that time the custom was universally observed. They have continued the custom even though it rests upon the authority of the Catholic Church and not upon an explicit text in the Bible. That observance remains as a reminder of the Mother Church, from which the non-Catholic sects broke away like a boy running away from home but still carrying in his pocket a picture of his mother or a lock of her hair.
Wow.
Almost like an image, carrying an image to the mother. So going back to all those different denominations you talked about, maybe the answer isn't necessarily any one of those 30,000 denominations,
Right.
or in Catholicism, but in one Protestant denomination that actually keeps the commandments of God and has the faith in Jesus. And so, one of the things that happened, going back, Alex, to some of the persecution that you talked about, one of the things you talked about was some of that persecution. Protestants had finally had enough in many ways, and we see an example of what took place. It was very sad what happened in France during the French Revolution. People finally rejected God in many ways, and ultimately when Napoleon marched into Rome, taking the Pope captive, we find...
That's the others.
Oh, you're right, actually.
We have multiple documents here.
So yeah, in 1798, this is the Anti-Jacobin, or Weekly Examiner.
So this paper is actually from it's took a while to find, but this is actually from 1798 itself, like it's a newspaper from them, and it's in English.
Oh, wow.
So that you can actually read it, which is cool.
Yeah, it details, in the meantime, the Pope is constrained, almost like he's restrained once again, you know, or rather allowed to fly, and in consideration of his great age is permitted to take an escort of 2 officers with him. The papacy lost temporal power.
Well, it's not just that, though. What's fascinating about this page is it doesn't just detail that he was taken and, you know, basically lost his temporal power. It says it in a quite damning way. I mean, they really talk about him here in the most negative light. And so this is a commentary on what was actually going on at the time. So this is like reading a political column, if you will, and it's discussing what other people are saying about this event, if that makes sense. So you kind of have to read between the lines. It's like reading, it'd be like reading a political pundit from today, if that makes sense. The papers contain a detail of the circumstances attending the entry of the French troops into Rome, communicated in a message from the Directory to the councils, which for stupid bombast and awkward pedantry rivals or exceeds the most disgusting thropides of the reporters of Robespierre. The message begins by stating that 2 governments, above all others, have shown themselves hostile to free and republican France, the cabinet of St. James and the theocracy of Rome. The history of England is reserved for some other, more pertinent occasion, but the history of Rome, for the last 1400 years, forms an essential part of the narrative of the transactions which have brought on the downfall of the papal government at the present hour, an event which, it now appears, was intended to avenge not the death of General Dupont only, but that of Emperor Louis de Bavière, if I'm reading this right. There's also some remote reference to the hitherto unpublished crimes of the Roman Emperor Tiberius. Upon this last cause of quarrel, however, no great stress is laid. And he goes on and on talking about how if I drop down, kind of picking up in the middle, it says, not content with having been for 1400 years the most bloody, perfidious, murdering, massacring, and assassinating government upon earth, Rome adds the last crime to the black catalog with the death of General Dupont, the friend and almost the brother-in-law of the French ambassador Bonaparte, who was killed in a tumult of the ambassador's own raising. So they're calling Rome the most bloody, perfidious, murdering, massacring, and assassinating government upon earth.
Wow. I guess you can see right here if this sentiment was...
Oh, you can take a look at it.
Yeah, with this sentiment taking place in France, we see the rise of kind of atheism and the godless rejection, the spirit of very much of Pharaoh of old, who said, "Who is Jehovah that I should obey him?" And unfortunately, because Rome distorted the picture of God, this is why you had people who rejected God entirely and said, if that's the way God is, I don't want to have anything to do with religion.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with how they, through the streets of France during the French Revolution, they took a bier that was on the backs of men, with staves that they would carry on their shoulder. And on the bier, they had a throne, and they would put a scantily clad woman in it, and they would parade her through the streets of Rome and say, "We are now crowning the goddess of reason."
Wow.
And it was at that time they also tried to change the work week away from a 7-day work week. They were basically trying to go full atheist. We want to have nothing to do with God. And that was a reaction basically to the Catholic Church to a large degree, because they were sick of the crimes of the Catholic Church, which is what that details right there, saying like, yeah, there's all these horrible things that have happened as a result of the Catholic Church. Well, this fits perfectly with Bible prophecy, because we know that a deadly wound is given. But what happens to that deadly wound? Where does that lead? What happens to the deadly wound? Does the beast die?
No, it's healed.
Yeah, no, it gradually healed and is still healing to this day, although I would say it's almost done. We can see a lot of Catholics getting back into political power.
Yeah.
But this is a newspaper article from the New York Times from 1929. And what we see right here is this newspaper was actually, this particular copy was released the very day that Rome began to get back some of her power once again. So reading right here from 1929, Vatican to become a city-state today. Mussolini will go there to exchange ratification of treaties creating it. Ceremony will be simple. Bronze door, closed since 1870, will open. Press comment meager on Pope's criticism of Tu Deus. So it marked the end of the 59-year-old estrangement between church and state and the creation of the Vatican city-state, as the ceremony will take place inside the Vatican in the private apartment of Cardinal Gaspari, Premier Mussolini, who will go there in his capacity of foreign minister. So it's a fascinating piece of history here that details at least the union of church and state once again, or their in terms of their power, which they have been seeking to grow ever since.
But what's more interesting is if you go online, you can get a subscription to the website newspapers.com, and you can actually pull up the microfilm, like the scan in of like old newspapers like this.
Really?
And they have a lot more on microfilm and on their databases than you can ever buy physical copies, because a lot of the newspapers are just not available anymore. But if you go back to 1929 on newspapers.com and you type in Vatican Old Wound, you will have dozens, and I mean dozens and dozens of newspapers all the way across the United States. And the headline that they ran was Old Wound Healed. Old Wound Healed, over and over and over. And so this copy doesn't have it. The New York Times one doesn't have it, and I wish it did. And I'm still looking for a 1929 newspaper that has it. But that's prophetic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you have them losing their power in 1798, and then in 1929 they regain power, and all the newspapers are publishing Old Wound Healed, Old Wound Healed. And now, do I believe the wound was fully healed at that time? No, but I think it was starting to be healed. And I think that as time progresses, that wound has just continued to heal.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there's still some scar tissue there, if you will, but they're regaining power at a prodigious rate.
One of the big issues, though, in the Protestant Reformation was this topic about the Sabbath. It was one that was trickled down into catechisms. We've got a catechism right here that mentions how there was no scriptural authority for the change from Sabbath to Sunday. This is a doctrinal catechism. This one's put out by Stephen Keenan right here. It's got an imprimatur and Nyalobstadt on it. But what's interesting to me is when we look at what's going on today, there's, in the context of the Protestant Reformation, the discussion on Sabbath and Sunday began to be recognized as a pivotal one connected to the Mark of the Beast crisis at the end of time. In the 17th century, there was a court physician, Peter Chamberlain, who wrote a letter right here. Let me carry this around. It's rather large and enlarged here, but he wrote a letter to Archbishop Sheldon about the little triple-crowned horn's change of times and laws, which being discovered which times and laws those are, good counsel may be taken from those angels that appeared to the beloved disciple John to blot out and escape the mark of the beast and return to the keeping of the laws of God, as celebrated by those angels. Now, what I find interesting about that is we very nearly had a big crisis over Saturday and Sunday in 1888 in the United States of America. So, of course, there was the Blair Act that almost went through, making it nationally a prohibition against working on Sunday. Now, it got shot down in front of the Senate Health and or Senate Labor Committee at that time.
And shot down, it really didn't get fully shot down. It mostly just got not pushed forward.
Right. But there was a lot of persecution for people in different areas of the United States for violating those laws. Alex, you had the chance to collect some of these articles. Tell us what you found here.
Well, actually, I also have my wife specifically to thank because she actually went and researched a lot of this herself, and she's really getting to be very good researching and compiling this way better than I could. But, you had this push for a Sunday law with the Blair Act. And then in 1895, just a few short years, about 7 years after that Blair Act was put forth, you had some Seventh-day Adventists who were keeping the seventh day, Saturday, holy, as in accord with the Bible commandment, the seventh day of the week, as Jews had done for thousands of years before, and for which there is no scriptural change to Sunday. And they worked on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And the work that they had to do was not anything egregious. There's accounts of them here chopping wood and going and tilling the ground in their fields on their own property, just doing normal work. And they got arrested and imprisoned.
Oh, wow.
And so what's interesting, we're here in the South, here in close to Chattanooga. And I have a paper here from the Chattanooga Times. Okay, so this is the Chattanooga Sunday Times right here. And what is the front headline of the April 14th, 1895 Chattanooga Sunday Times?
Adventist.
It has Adventist. It says, Adventist, something about the colony in Ray County observed the seventh day. Details of the trial and imprisonment of the leaders. They refused to pay a fine. Talks with some of the leading elders of the colony. Charge of the judge to jury. The peculiar form of belief and the biblical authority. They worked on Sunday, which was displeasing to some of their neighbors, and they were arrested.
Man. What year was this again?
That's April 14th, 1895.
1995.
And this right here, we haven't really shared this anywhere else. This is brand new. This is hot off the research as far as that goes. Nobody else is talking about this. And so my wife went through and she started looking and she started pulling in different documents, and she found that in 1895, it was making headline news across the country. Like properly across the country. So this is just kind of a compilation right here of all the different articles out there. And what's fascinating about them is they were put in chain gangs.
Really?
Yeah, you see right here.
Oh, man.
The Boston Daily Globe, Wednesday, August 7th, 1895. Suffer like true martyrs. Chain gangs and jails cannot break the spirit of Seventh-day Adventists.
Oh, my goodness. What?
And so there's a picture of them at the quarry in a chain gang hard at work. And you go through some of these accounts here, and let me just read one of them here, just a little brief excerpt so you can kind of get the tone of what's going on here. For a month or more, a number of Seventh-day Adventists have been confined in a Ray County jail. At this place, upon the charge of breaking the Sabbath, 19 indictments were brought against these men and other Adventists who live in Graysville, 5 miles below Dayton, on the Cincinnati Southern Railroad, and 10 men came to trial. They refused to employ counsel and argued their own cases with Bible in hand, affirming that the scriptures taught that Saturday and no other day but Saturday should be observed as Sunday. The trial attracted much attention and the scene was a notable one, but despite their pleadings, they were convicted of Sabbath breaking and fined. Though the fines were very small, they refused on principle to pay them and went to jail. 4 served their time and got out. Today, the remaining 5, G.W. Colcord, a minister of the faith, W.L. Burchard, M.C. Stutvant, and D.C. Plum and E. Sabat were pardoned by Governor Turney and released from confinement. They were overjoyed and returned in hot haste to Graysville, where a colony of Adventists had been recently established. This case has excited attention over the country. That's just one example, but this wasn't one case. There were multiple cases that were going on at the same time. And so
Were chain gangs a popular thing back then?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. An inkling of what church and state would result in can be drawn from the fact that 9 good and pious Seventh-day Adventists are languishing in jail at Dayton, Tennessee for working on Sunday, digging a well, contrary to the laws of Tennessee. And in St. Louis, they fined Chas Stotzer for shaving people on Sunday, contrary to the laws of Missouri. Okay, so... And there's this whole huge article right here. There's honestly a lot of information here. You could go on and on. So I'll leave that for people to look up on their own. But why bring this up? Why talk about this?
Well, I think the reason why is look at what's going on around us today. You know, there's been a lot of supernatural phenomenon recently, but also we're seeing elements of this discussion come back into the topics in Christianity today with legislation. We're seeing manifestos like national conservatism with many of its leaders talking about the Sabbath and the sacred as part of their manifesto, but also with Project 2025. There's a lot of people that are familiar with that. Chapter 18 of Project 2025, which Trump tried to distance himself from the entire, Heritage Foundation manifesto. Of course, what's happened subsequently, all of the writers of it have been placed in different positions of power, or many of them at least, and many of them are still waiting confirmation. But we can see how there is a push in Chapter 18 to bring back Sunday legislation. Now, it looks very mild initially, with exemption clauses or toleration clauses in disguise.
What do you mean Chapter 18?
Well, Chapter 18 of Project 2025 is about recommendations for the Department of Labor. And so back in 1888, this was a big discussion nationally, then with the Blair Act, to bring about federal enforcement of blue laws. And there's kind of a push going that direction now today to bring what Rome recognized and established for a very long time as her sign of authority back in the days of the Protestant Reformation and even farther, to institute that by law. Now, in case anybody out there is like, wait, how do you know that's her sign of authority? Go to Catechism 2176, and you will find where they actually put forward Sunday as their outward sign of authority. Now, God has a true sign in Exodus 31:17, but Rome has a counterfeit, instituted by man. And so it's fascinating to see this come to the forefront of the discussion with Christian nationalism. If you're going to try and solve America's problems of morality and bring about, the Ten Commandments back to solve all of the secular problems with atheism and the godlessness of the left, there's now being calls to bring the Ten Commandments in the public school system. Well, which Ten Commandments? Are they going to be the ones that God originally defined himself in Exodus 20? Or is it going to be ones that have little changes and edits and modifications so that it looks like it's true religion, but it's actually false religion?
Right. So, what you're seeing is echoes of what happened in 1888.
Right.
So you look at the timeline. You have Christ die on the cross. The disciples are persecuted for the first couple hundred years, burned at the stake, lit the Colosseum by their flames. Okay. And then you have kind of a subtle changing that occurs. Actually, if you look at that book, actually, that you have right there, if you look at page 1297, it has a section talking about something that's interesting. It says, out of reverence for the Lord's burial, we ought to fast on the Sabbath. So one of the things that's of note is in the few hundred years after Christ's death, they weren't worshiping on Sunday for the first at least 200 years.
There's some discussion, some debate over that, but what we find is as Sunday crept in certain circles, you find this with the some of the Gnostics and some of the other individuals who observe the eighth day. Irenaeus actually warns against. He warns against some of these people.
But by and large, the majority of people were still worshiping on Saturday, the Sabbath. Okay. But what you had them do is they started implementing things like this, like what you see on page 1297, which was out of reverence of the Lord's burial, we ought to fast on the Sabbath. And so what do you do by making people fast one day of the week? Well, it's not a very fun day, right? Okay. Well, then they would have people feast on Sunday. Okay. And so you had this change where all of a sudden, and this occurred gradually, but gradually more and more weight was placed on Sunday. And there's actually discussion of this kind of back and forth about the 2 days in about the 300s. Okay. Then you have the Catholic Church rising to power, and you have 1260 years of persecution that takes place. This is the Dark Ages, right? And this is where they have total dominion, church-state power combined, out there persecuting, killing millions, okay, in the name of religion. And then you have the deadly wound given in 1798, which we showed the document showing that the General Berthier goes in, deposes the then sitting pope, and he dies in exile. That deadly wound continues until 1929 when it starts to be healed. But you have this little movement that's taking place in the 1800s where you have a group of people that is keeping the seventh-day Sabbath, and they're being persecuted for it. And in 1888, you have the Blair Act, where they went out and they wanted to have this universal day of rest on Sunday. And we found old newspapers as well on newspapers.com detailing that back in 1888. And they had a petition of like 6 million signatures.
Wow.
In preference to push forward this bill. Okay. Now, 6 million signatures sounds like a lot, but it's a whole lot for 1888. And we actually have a newspaper right here. See, we got all the old documents here. We're like all about the receipts. But we have a document right here from June 14, 1888. James, show this to the camera there behind you so you can see it a little better.
No.
Saying that, that they had received the Blair bill discussing Sunday rest. And what was interesting about this is 6 million people signed the petition for this bill. You see it in the top right there, them talking about it. 6 million people signed the petition. There was only 50 million people in the country living at the time. So that's a lot of people getting on board for that. Now, it ultimately doesn't go forward, but a few years later, you have, persecution occurring in 1895 of those who keep the seventh-day Sabbath. And now there's so many echoes that are occurring between 1888 and now. So, for example, who was Pope in 1888? It was Pope Leo.
Yeah.
Who's Pope now?
Leo the 14th. And now it's before it was 13th, right?
Yeah. Right. And so in 1888, who brings this forward and where is this bill presented? It's presented to the Labor Committee, right? And the new Project 2025 mandate that's coming out, where they're talking about paying time and a half, amending the Fair Labor Standards Act to pay time and a half on Sundays. Then it says it will default to Sunday. That's going before the Labor Committee, correct? The only president other than Donald Trump to serve 2 consecutive terms, non-consecutive terms, separated by time in between, was the president in 1888.
Interesting.
So you're seeing this like echo take place. Do you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that is fascinating, isn't it?
There's a author that I just found out here the other day who wrote a book back in 1900 about the last president, specifically referencing a mob that was going to storm Fifth Avenue Hotel. And the first book in the series was about a son of a wealthy entrepreneur or businessman or whatever by the name. The son's name is Baron Trump.
Really?
It's just fascinating. Ingersoll Lockwood from 1900, specifically now Fifth Avenue Hotel has Fifth Avenue's one of the hotels there is the Trump Hotel now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So there's it's very interesting. You want to talk about like spiritualism and
Sure.
And the guide for Baron Trump was this entity named Dawn. So it's just it's interesting. It's like
What are you talking about? Doesn't Trump have a son named Baron?
Yeah.
Not the same Baron that we're talking about right now.
No. I mean, obviously, this was somebody writing about.
Oh, when was
Sorry, 1900, like around the year 1900.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Baron Trump, and when the third book in the series, at least from what I've seen, is called The Last President, and it's about this stirring figure from New York, and the very first place to get raided by the mobs is the hotel on Fifth Avenue.
That's kind of predictive programming there.
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit here.
You heard about the priest or the hermit in Italy that was like, had a brick commission that knew that Donald Trump was going to lead America back to God. You heard about all that, right?
No.
No, that's a whole nother story. There was a guy who was living in Italy at the time. This is on several different YouTube channels. And he was kind of a hermit. He would go to like all the different masses of all the different Catholic churches. And he said that he was absolutely certain that God had brought Trump to become president to lead America back to God. And this was before his first term.
We were warned in the last days that there would be those who call good evil and evil good. But one of the things that I find interesting was if you go back to Gregory the Great actually opposed people who preached about the Sabbath in Rome, calling them preachers of Antichrist. Those who taught obedience to the commandments of God. Now, ultimately, throughout the Middle Ages, Rome consistently did Sunday legislation. In Valladolid, for example, in 1322, there were prohibitions against doing manual labor on the day. So you can see where this kind of Sunday legislation pushed by Christian nationalism came from all of these councils. But we do find in the 8th century, there was evidence of peasants, not just Jews, but peasants, groups that, precursors and to some of the reformers later on, also groups associated with the Waldenses who kept the seventh-day Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the concern that I have as far as Sunday legislation at the end of time and how it fits into the bigger picture of everything that's going on. The concern that I have, though, in just looking through the pages of history, is one of the things that's happened in times past with this whole Sabbath Sunday issue is, going back to the beginning at Laodicea, there was a decree that Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath, an age-old theological slur that if you are keeping the Sabbath, you're Judaizing, when really the Sabbath wasn't made for Jews, it was made for man, as Gretsch says. So there was a prohibition against keeping the commandments of God. In fact, it went so far that if you did not keep Sunday, you could be beaten with 100 stripes. Of course, later on, there were also decrees, with people put to death who did not keep that. It reminds me of an image back in Daniel, where there was a decree that all needed to bow down and worship that image on pain of death if you did not obey the decree. And so what I'm concerned about is Catholicism has a track record here of instituting policies, protecting her sign or mark here with coercion. And so it's going to set a test for the world. Will you obey God or will you obey man? And there'll be those who are misled, from what I read in the Bible, by signs and wonders. So when we see all of this stuff occurring in the skies, Satan's got an angle in this too, where he's going to do signs and wonders to try and deceive people and make them think that what they're offering is true worship, when they really need to be going back to the Word of God and relying upon the Word of God for the standard on what constitutes true worship. So it's interesting. Alex, what do you think about that?
I think, we read about this Antichrist power that's going to cause all men to receive a mark in their forehead or in their hand. And that if they do not receive that, and it says he will cause them to receive this, right? And without it, they will not be able to buy or sell. You couldn't have done no buy, no sell very easily at any age prior to this. But now you have the technological capability, especially with the CBDCs, blockchain currency. You have the ability that if that became the standard of, even Visa or MasterCard, you could shut it off. But you could more effectively control people with things like CBDCs. So we have the framework that if you wanted to do something like that now, you could. So we as Protestants are not holding to a new position. We're actually holding to an old position that the Pope, the papacy system, that papal system is the Antichrist system.
Not just an old system or an old idea, but a biblical one.
Oh, exactly. Sure. And the thing is it's not denigrating any particular Catholic. I'm not trying to, say that all Catholics are going to hell or anything like that. But what I think is important to note is it is the Antichrist system. That system of worship is wrong. And so what is their mark? They say it themselves. What is their mark? They say that Sunday, the change of Sunday, is their mark of authority. Okay. So then, well, what's God's true mark then? So when you study that out, you start realizing that the battle that's going to be taking place at the end of time is one that's a line in the sand. Which side are you going to choose? Which day? Worship. Who are you going to worship? And it's not so much just, well, you can worship God any day of the week. A lot of people will say that. They'll say, well, I can worship God 7 days out of the week. You can. But there's one commandment that says not to work and to honor that one day. Okay? So when we see this happen, how are you going to convince everyone to choose one way or the other? Because the atheist out there is going to say, I don't want to worship on any day of the week. In fact, y'all can keep your days of rest. I'm going to go work 7 days out of the week. Okay. And how are you going to effectively convince that person that, no, you really do need to choose? And the way you do it is with a threefold union. Okay. You can't get everybody to say they're going to be Catholic. You've got too many people that are just like, no, I'm never going to become Catholic. You can't convince everybody to be Protestant or evangelical. Okay. So what you do it is with a threefold union of Catholicism, apostate Protestantism, and spiritualism. And the thing I appreciate about your channel, Strange Normal, is that you delve deep into that spiritualistic aspect, showing that the deception that's coming, because it ultimately, this all comes, it's not like the Pope is the mastermind here. Satan is the mastermind. And he is the one that is orchestrating all this behind the scenes. And he has power to appear like a being of light, like a glowing ball in the sky, like a ship, an ancient ship with an anchor that's cast down to the earth. He has the ability to manipulate men's vision. I mean, go back to the Garden of Eden. We know it wasn't the actual snake who was doing the talking. Right. It was Satan manipulating Eve's eyesight, manipulating her perception of reality to convince her of a lie. And we know that that's what's going to be happening at the end of time. And so through that threefold union, your channel focuses on the spiritualistic aspect of it, and I really appreciate that. Our channel has more focused on the Catholicism aspect and the apostate Protestantism aspect, and how we're leading the world, how the world is being led down this pathway of deception. So one of the things that we focus on is doing Sunday law updates. Cool. Because, and so you look in the news, and when you start really looking for it, you're seeing a push like you've never seen before. You're seeing this swing towards Catholicism in political climates. 7 out of 9 Supreme Court justices are Catholic now. You have Catholic VP. You have Marco Rubio. You have, even though it's some other people may not come out as Catholic, sometimes they'll have Catholic tattoos, they'll have Catholic imagery, or they're heavily friendly towards Catholicism. You just had Biden as the second Catholic president ever elected. The first one was highly against any combination of church-state power with JFK, and he was ultimately assassinated. And so then you have Biden, who is arguably, depending on how you want to look at it, which side of Catholicism, he lies. But J.D. Vance is devoutly Catholic. Okay, so you're seeing this swing when we have documents like we showed earlier that show the foundation of this country was Protestant. And it was heavily against the Antichrist power, which they viewed synonymous with the papacy. And so why are we seeing this? It's because we're all going towards a choice, a line in the sand that's happening at the end time. And it's all a deception focused on that.
Absolutely. Oh, wow. This has been very interesting. If there's one video on your YouTube channel that people should see, which one's that?
The one, James, we have a lot on there. Which one would you say?
I'd say the one that, I don't know. I think my favorite so far that I think we've done is the one with Lennox, honestly.
So yeah, we've actually done one here recently where we actually went and discussed with a Christian nationalist and had a conversation of where they're wanting to take the country. And we actually have several more episodes scheduled where we're going to be doing more of that.
Honestly, I think what the man said makes the case for us because he kind of says it himself.
He does. Yeah. He says that that's where he sees the country going, is legislating all 10 commandments, including Sabbath laws. And he believes that that would be on Sunday. And so it's not that we're trying to make these people say anything they're not already saying. We're just trying to say, listen to them yourself.
Yeah.
And see where the country is headed. And so that video, we uploaded it. Oh, it's been, 2-3 weeks ago?
Yeah, something like that.
And it's gotten a ton of views.
Yeah.
Because people are like, wow, like, this is eye-opening.
Yeah.
So, check us out, Heritage and Hope Ministries. That's our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
heritageandhope.org, and you'll see links to pictures of these old documents, and you can go on there and donate to help support us so that we can continue to get more old documents like this and continue to advance our cause. So.
Very good. Very good. Man, what a blessing to have all this information. And how did you acquire all this information? And has it been just a couple years, or?
God has really helped us because, like I said, we only started doing this in August of last year with this one. This was the first book that we purchased right here. And all the rest, it's been scouring the internet, and it's amazing some of the old books that you can find for pretty low prices. But then in addition to that, we're now having people that are reaching out to us. Like, so for example, this book right here, this old catechism from the 1800s that's like basically falling apart, but it has some really interesting statements in there specifically about Saturday versus Sunday. Somebody just walked up to us and said, I'm old. I'm not carrying the torch any longer. It's now time for you to carry it. And I'm giving this to you so that you can show the world. And we're like, these books have been sitting on a shelf for some of them hundreds of years so that they can proclaim a message and show something that's happening at the end of time. This book right here, I always try and talk about this. This book right here was printed in 1559, 465 years old. 10 years after this book was printed, Dirk Willems, he was a Dutch Anabaptist reformer, and he did not believe in infant baptism. And the Catholic Church did not like him for that. And he was imprisoned. And he was in a castle that was surrounded by a moat. And it was in the middle of winter. And somehow he managed to escape from his cell. And he was fleeing away from these people that were persecuting him. And he ran across a frozen moat in the middle of winter. Okay, and there's ice and snow everywhere, right? And guards start pursuing him across the ice. And as he's crossing the ice, his guard, who's hot on his heels, falls through the ice water and starts to drown. And so now he's faced with the choice of run and flee to safety, at the wood line that's, up ahead, or should he turn around and help the guard who's drowning? So he turns around and he goes back and he drags the guard out of the water. Well, as a result of that, they recaptured him. They recaptured Dirk, and they took him back and they said, he just saved this guy's life. Should we pardon him or something? And they said, no, he's still guilty. He's still guilty. And so they took and they burned him at the stake.
Oh.
And this was 10 years after this book was printed. And the wind that day blew the flames sideways. And so the fire wasn't, quite as hot as it normally would be. And normally you'd pass out from smoke inhalation pretty quickly when they burned you at the stake, but he didn't. And he sat there burning at the stake for an hour.
Oh.
And he sat there screaming, and you could hear his screams for like a mile or two away. There's accounts of it written at the time. And so you have somebody who gave his life willingly for someone who was trying to kill him.
Mm.
And that was 10 years after this book was printed. You think about, that's the Spirit of Christ right there. That's what Christ did. He came, and as they were nailing him to the cross, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Mm.
So when I talk about these books, and when we bring these books, we bring them to churches, we bring them to show people. I tell people, these pages are metaphorically dripping with blood. And they're dripping with the blood of Protestants. They're dripping with the blood of true Christians who understood what Christ meant when he said, love those who persecute you and do evilly. And so, they have a story yet to tell. They've been sitting in some castle or in some monastery for the last several hundred years so that they can teach people at the end of time what's coming on this world.
Wow.
So check these books out. You can see scans of them, full HD scans. You can see them individually on our website, and we're still trying to get some of them up there because we've been collecting them all so quickly. We don't even have them all on there yet, but we're trying to get them on there. So yeah, that's kind of what we focus on is current events, what's happening today in the political climate, what's happening today in society that's pushing us towards this coming precipice.
Right.
And then how does it equate to the past?
And I think the hope from all of this is, what the Bible says when you see all of these events coming to pass, lift up your heads for your redemption draws nigh.
Right.
And so we can look upon the fulfillment of the signs of prophecy with a sense of hope that Christ is coming back soon. And we have not much time left. Will you close us with prayer?
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and have a prayer real quick. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for your many wonderful blessings, and thank you for the ability to show these books and to show the truth of Jesus and to show how you have led through the last 2,000 years since Christ's death on this earth. I pray that you would help us to get the message out there to people in the world, to help them understand the line in the sand and to choose you wholeheartedly without anyone else's interpretation, but reading the Bible for themselves and seeing the truth that it contains. I pray that you would please guide our hearts and our minds as we go from this place, and thank you for your many tremendous blessings. In Jesus' name, amen.